Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Outgrow's Market of the Month. I'm your host, Dr. Saksham Sharda. I'm the creative director at outgrow.co. And for this month, we're going to interview Eric Quanstrom, who is the CMO at Cience, which is a company that helps others grow primarily through lead generation. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, Eric, we're going to start with a rapid fire round just to break the ice.
Okay.
You get 3 passes. In case you don't want to answer the question, you can just say pass, but try to keep your answers to one word or one sentence only, okay?
Sure.
All right, so the first one. At what age do you want to retire?
Never.
How long does it take you to get ready in the mornings?
20 minutes.
Most embarrassing moment of your life?
Several. Once when I had a really freaky surfing accident and was trying to unwind from being concussed in our office space and was actually discovered by somebody else.
Ah, wow. All right, the next one. Favorite color?
Probably Spartan Green.
What time of day are you most inspired?
8 a.m.
How many hours of sleep can you survive on?
I'm an 8-hour sleep kind of guy.
hmm Fill in the blank. An upcoming marketing trend is blank.
Account-based marketing.
The city in which the best kiss of your life happened.
Rosarito, Mexico.
Pick one, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey.
Pass.
The biggest mistake of your career.
Mistakes are learning events, so I don't have one to isolate.
hmm How do you relax?
Sleep.
Hmm. How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
1.
A habit of yours that you hate.
Pass. I'll think on that.
Okay. The most valuable skill you've learned in life.
Empathy.
And the last one is your favorite Netflix show.
Cobra Kai.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the end of the rapid fire round. You had 9 on 10 because there was just one pass. So that was quite good. So the first question in the long form is while talking of enterprise sales development, what are some of the typical business challenges encountered by enterprise clients?
Wow, they're many, they're varied, and they're usually unique to the client themselves. So oftentimes we're helping companies penetrate new markets, introduce new products, focus in on new geographies. And really, a lot of it is isolating down on how that company wants to grow, where they want to grow. And typically, we will be engaged to run the outbound or direct response outreach on their behalf, depending on those goals.
And so, could you give us an example of one interesting case in this point?
Yeah, sure. So, very familiar publicly traded company wanted to really open up Latin America and primarily Mexico and tap Cience and a number of outbound teams to run campaigns directly in kind of like the borders where they had isolated down and had key accounts and key prospects that they want to develop. So we help them with a multi-channel outreach strategy and ultimately bring new sales opportunities to their teams in Latin America. And we've been very successful at doing that and ultimately providing a lot of results for that company.
And how is it like switching to a new or like expanding into a new region for companies in general? Do you find that is increasingly becoming the strategy of a lot of companies, or what is happening in this area? Yeah.
We actually see the reverse even more. In fact, it's an overwhelming amount of foreign companies that want to penetrate American shores and want to do business in the good old US of A, where I'm at. So I would say that like the vast majority of our business is on US soil in the 50 states here. And I think that there's a lot of interest, especially for multinationals or other companies that are, kind of like looking to up their game in America. And outbound is a great place to start, primarily for the reasons that, um, number one, with outbound, you get to kind of call your shot. You figure out who your ideal customer profile is. You figure out what audiences you want to target, even down to the contact level and the role that they play or the persona that they would have. And then you set your course on essentially reaching those individuals and starting up sales conversations through multiple means: email, phone, LinkedIn, advertising, web. And ultimately, by using those channels of penetration, we're able to hand back to companies a steady stream of predictable net new revenue opportunities.
And how important is it to prioritize, like, especially when there are different regions involved, how important is it to prioritize building an aligned brand to drive growth in the coming year? Would you agree that there is a great challenge and risk linked to brand perception to achieve marketing goals?
Oh, without a doubt. I think that brand is part of the story. And one of the things that's really unique that we have a kind of a catbird seat on is that every company that we run our outbound or lead generation managed services for, we're running it as them. So nobody even knows Cience exists in the prospect case. And so ultimately we are, for better or worse, tied to the brand and kind of the awareness and the brand promise and everything that is like essential to that company, that name, that associations, the positive or the negative images that would already be associated with the brand. So, a lot of our campaigns are really focused on taking that into account. For unknown brands, where there's very little brand familiarity, a lot of our, kind of chief goal underneath, producing net new sales appointments is raising awareness. And so that is part and parcel of everything that we do.
And has there been any difficulty in particular that you've come across with brand and alignment ever?
Sure. I think that it is, on average, all things being equal, easier for well known brands to penetrate into even new markets than it is for unknown brands to do likewise. And I think that, when you have kind of, I like to think of brands as a container. And ultimately, if they're a container or a bucket of associations and ideas about that brand, if I were to say the words Coca-Cola, you would immediately have associations that you would put into your own container about that brand, what it is, what it stands for, what it makes you feel, the kind of things that would conjure up. If all of a sudden you're working on behalf of a brand that has an empty container, and there's just nothing that anyone understands or feels or otherwise recognizes about that brand, that's both a blessing and a curse. It's a white space, a blank canvas that you can paint on and you can create very favorable associations, but it's also a potential negative in the sense that, the person on the other end of the line, on the other end of an email, on the receiving end of being a prospect, won't have any associations, positive or negative, and you have to build from the ground up.
hmm And so, branding is one thing. What is your opinion on marketing budgets being the first C-suite budget to be cut and then the last to be restored in the coming years, in the recession that we expect to be coming? Would you say there is a certain disposability to the CMO role as compared to other C-suite roles?
I think that that's so. First of all, I think marketing budgets being the first to be cut is very short sighted. And what I would say is that if you think about strategies of, kind of creating net new growth, strategies obviously change when conditions change. But one of the things that I would encourage anyone, who's thinking deeply about these things to recognize is that in a recessionary environment, the general rule is always to do more with less. So, I think marketing no different, getting cuts or seeing cuts across the board to budgets. But I would encourage thinking that was a little bit more equal, because marketing is oftentimes the salve, the place where you can like make huge gains in downturns. I've seen this happen with winning and really successful brands like over and over. I've got a few gray hairs on my head and I've lived through a few recessions, and I've watched it happen. I've watched the companies that went in to the downturn, to the turn, right? Like they always say in car driving, like, speed into the turn rather than, or accelerate into the turn, so to speak. Um, that's the motion that I think winning companies embrace, and they realize and recognize um, moments in time where a macro economy is actually giving them a gift, and that gift is, hey, I can do what everyone else is doing, or I could do the old familiar playbook and just cut, 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 or I could be very judicious and I could be very like strategic, and I could say marketing is one of those things that I might cut less in order to grow more than my relevant competitors and take market share in this time of turmoil.
Okay. And so it's almost like drifting through a recession. I just thought of a Tokyo drift, kind of like turning with a drift.
Well, I think that ultimately you can be reactive to trends, or you can kind of
Hmm.
play the trends to your own best benefit. And I don't know that there would be a listener in the audience or people that are running a business that would want to be labeled as just being reactive and taking, kind of like, I'll get what I get and I don't have a fit. That's what I used to tell my kids. Um, I actually think that most downturns, most recessions present really awesome opportunities, and at least at our company, that's how we're looking to attack a potentially recessionary environment.
And so, do you think brand authenticity itself will grow in the coming years, and optimizing the customer or prospect experience will be more important than sales or traditional marketing campaigns?
I think the die is already cast on that, and you can look nowhere else but the B2C markets for kind of all the cues you need to learn about B2B. What used to be considered extraordinary customer experience is now table stakes. And I think that trend, if you will, only exacerbates or continues going forward. There's a lot of people, a lot of pundits, a lot of analysts in the space that have talked a lot about, we've moved from various economies, and right now the economy that we're in is an attention economy. And if you really dial it all back to, what does an attention economy mean? It really means that the customer experience is kind of everything. It kind of means that, people will vote even in B2B non-transactional sales environments with their wallet if they're not having their expectations met, if they're not getting the attention, the service, the right foot forward that they believe they deserve, because frankly they're getting it in every other aspect of their life, and they've been conditioned to being treated very well, not poorly, not as a number, not as you know just a digit on a piece of paper. And so ultimately I think that we've already had a number of brands really lead or blaze a path here to where the expectations game has just been raised so high, and I think every marketer that doesn't recognize that trend is kind of foolish.
And when it comes to social media in particular, would you agree the best way to increase your business's visibility is by the right social media platforms? Where does social media stand in all this?
Sure, I think social definitely has a role, and I think that's another strategic choice of channel and time, money, and resources where you exercise the types of campaigns, the types of dialogues, the types of engagement, the type of awareness that you want to raise on a given social media platform. So, in a sense, like, it's all in the name, right? Social media. And ultimately, these are aggregators of people, they're aggregators of affinities and groups. And ultimately, the way in which a brand chooses to interact, chooses to kind of go forward on a given social media platform is a really big deal. It creates a lot of awareness. It creates a lot of those associations, that bucketing that I was talking about earlier. A lot of people take their cues from what they learn about your social media presence.
So, what are the key social media platforms to be on right now?
Well, for our business and for B2B especially, LinkedIn is number one by an order of magnitude. And I think that having a very cogent LinkedIn strategy, not just for obtaining followers and being regularly seen in the feeds of network connections, but also producing high quality content and having favorable brand impression on that particular network is a very important um, area of focus for us.
So, what would be your opinion then on, say, value based selling?
Well, I think that value is everything. Value is also always in the eye of the beholder or the prospect. So one of my favorite sayings in sales, and oh, by the way, I'm one of these marketers that believes that marketing serves sales, and people should never lose sight of that. And I don't. I think that, one of my favorite sayings is that price before value just like commoditizes your brand. So I think establishing value is possibly the key to just about every sales cycle that you might have, especially as a B2B brand. So I really think about value and value creation as helping prospects, companies that you would be doing business with, understand or unlock the value that they would see in partnering with your product or service. And ultimately, it's their goals, it's their end state, it's their not before, but their after that really matters. And helping them, kind of like realize what that after might look like with your help, with your guidance.
And so, speaking of value before price, then how can brands measure results accurately and ensure their marketing goals are set for long term brand building, alongside also, of course, short term growth?
Well, I think that one of the first things is to have everything aligned and to understand who you serve, how you help, what you can do to create value in every situation that you might encounter. And so ultimately, then putting the structure in place on top of that framework is really an important part of the journey. The second half of that is really understanding, what a customer's experience, to go back to that theme, is going to be like with your brand, with your company. And ultimately, the value that you can unlock during that journey, how you can communicate it, how you can essentially provide analytics on it, how you can ultimately get somebody where they want to go and do so in a way that they understand and see the value that is provided on that journey.
And could you give us an example of any companies that come to your mind that are nailing this quite well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would be self-serving and overly biased if I name Cience first, but I think that there's a lot of companies out in the market these days, especially in the explosion of what I've seen in the SaaS space, of a lot of companies that have provided enormous amounts of value, and that's one of the reasons why they've rocketed in overall success. I would point to some of the market leaders. I'd look at someone like a HubSpot as a perfect example. They've recently adopted, not that recently, but kind of the flywheel concept. And I think that their CRM attached to their marketing automation platform, attached to their customer service suite, attached to all of the feature functionality that you might get through that platform is a great value creator, because ultimately um, you've got a company that really focused their eyes on the prize of becoming kind of like a system of record for businesses. We standardized on HubSpot and the CRM a few years back, and we've seen a lot of like uptake and frankly really efficient usage of the platform ever since. So helping
And
get
so,
us where we wanted to go.
mhm. And so, what are some of the things you guys are doing on LinkedIn to create value or to tap into a value economy?
Sure. I think, our presence on LinkedIn, we try to be regular, we try to be consistent, we strive to be conversational and provide content that we ourselves would want to read and that we would want to interact with and ultimately find fascinating. We have a podcast. It's called Enterprise Sales Development. That's something that we put out on a weekly basis every Wednesday. It's something that we share. And it's, I don't know that you ever hear the word science mentioned in the podcast even once. It's largely for the benefit of, discovering insights of other practitioners in the sales development space, and kind of what they've gone through and different perspectives and bringing ideas to the table. So that's a regular share for us on LinkedIn, as is most of our blog content, our guides, and our long form things that we produce that, again, we find to be very useful and valuable for people in our areas of promise.
And so, for B2B, especially, it's hard to measure when such a conversion takes place through all this value based content. So,
Yeah.
how do you think about that?
Well, I like to think of it holistically, and I don't get too wrapped around the axle around attribution because, whether you're measuring first touch attribution, last touch attribution, blended attribution, there's a lot of different ways to get really confused and really like over your skis, so to speak, on, what credit should I give to this source for this particular deal that was won, without recognizing that a buying cycle is just that, a cycle. And part of the cycle starts with the first touch, starts with first awareness, starts with first kind of brand impressions, and then moves its way through numerous experiences. In fact, it's funny, our VP of sales went through and did a number of audits on just the number of emails exchanged before a sale was closed in our average sales cycle, and that number was north of 30. So, just the back and forth on that particular channel for deals to actually close is a lot of conversations. We assume that our buyers are also active on the web, researching our company, researching our products. They're definitely on social media. They're checking us out there. They're forming associations and impressions of what it might be like to do business with us. And so LinkedIn is one of those channels where it's a great place to discover more about a brand. In fact, I'll be honest, on the buy side, which I am more often than not as a CMO, it turns out that when you have marketing budget and and a big title, you end up being on the buy side, buying a lot of either tech stack or services on the regular. I look at LinkedIn very regularly to get a good sense of who a company is, what they do, the size of that company, the footprint of that company, how active that company is. And ultimately, it's kind of like a second place, if you will, besides just the general web, where you can get a really good feel for what a company's all about.
And so, in your opinion, what are some ways, some concrete ways that businesses can create a solid and sustainable sales foundation for the years to come?
Well, I think that the solid and sustainable is to recognize first, depending on your phase of growth, are you searching for product market fit and early stage? Are you well past that and, multi-billion dollar enterprise organization? Once you understand the stage of growth that you're at, applying the appropriate, configuration strategies, resources, headcount, models, if you will, and or methodologies are really appropriate. So I'm a big proponent of, kind of the specialization model, which says that, again, every sales cycle is a cycle and contains a number of moving parts. And there's great efficiencies to be gained by, adopting kind of an SDR first model in feeding into a sales cycle, feeding out into an account management, kind of like approach. So ultimately having the ability to give the right touch at the right time on the right journey is one that I think most customers recognize as being best for them. And, the numbers would tend to agree with what I'm saying. Back in yesteryear, we saw a lot of like variability, leakage, and real problems with scale when you tried to place all of those functions that I just mentioned into the brain of one person. And so we've kind of moved away from those. I don't want to call them battle days, but ultimately, I think that there's a better model, and this is it. And so ultimately, recognizing then phase of growth, scaling that model, and having that model, kind of produce results for you in good times and in bad, and ultimately be a very efficient go-to-market motion is really important.
And well, that was the last question, but we have one additional bonus question
Bonus
for
question.
you,
Love it.
which is basically, what would you be doing if not this in your life right now?
Boy, that's a tough one. Surfing on a professional surf tour, maybe.
Okay.
If I could wave my magic wand and travel the globe and surf only the best surf breaks.
So you're into surfing.
Oh yeah, big time.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last question. Thanks everyone for joining us for this month's episode of Outgrow's Market of the Month. That was Eric Quanstrom, who's the CMO at Cience. Thanks for joining us, Eric.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Check out their website and their podcast for more details, and we'll see you once again next month with another Marketer of the Month.